Thank you everyone for joining us today for the third online event of this month. We have these wonderful people here today to discuss how we can apply behavioral science in our everyday life. Thank you, panel, for joining us from so many different parts of the world. Just a quick word of caution before we begin. I have a terrible cold, so if I start coughing uncontrollably, please bear with me. I'm Junofy, and I'll be your host today. I'm the founder and CEO of India Behavioural Economics Network. We're basically an organization working to promote and streamline the field of behavioral science in India and also in other South Asian countries. I'm going to now quickly introduce the speakers before we dive into the conversation. Rhiannon is the managing editor of Farnam Street Media. She serves as the lead writer and editor of the super popular Farnam Street blog and the Brainfoot newsletter, which pretty much made the concept of mental models accessible to everyone, I guess. She's also the co-author, along with Shane Parrish, of the great mental model books, the 3 giant red books, which I have stuck on my bookshelf. Thank you so much, Rhiannon, for joining us today. I am a big fan as well.
Thank you.
We also have Anurag, who is the co-founder of Final Mile, which is the first company in the world to systematically apply behavioral science to explain and, of course, influence human behavior. About a year ago, he also founded Mentza, a live audio platform where people can get involved in 20-minute conversation. It's really cool. So if you haven't yet, you should try it out. As you can imagine, he's one of the OG behavioral scientists. He's also been a kind mentor to most behavioral science organizations in India now. Really happy to have you here, Anurag. And we have Samuel. He is a behavioral strategist, sort of helping organizations around the world to use behavioral science to build amazing digital products and services. He's also the founder of the largest behavioral design community and newsletter, Habit Weekly. Thank you for joining us, Samuel. And as you can see, he's Swedish, so he's endorsing IKEA today. And we have Ceren, who is the principal strategy and insights lead at Google Canada. She sort of leads a lot of efforts to help clients solve key businesses and societal problems through understanding consumer behavior and various applications of Google products. She's also a dear friend and a wonderful person to work with. So glad to have you here, Ceren. Great. So that's about our speakers today. Let's dive right into the conversation. So one thing that most people I know are really trying and failing miserably at is building a routine and fixing one's sleep cycle. Right. And I mean, to be fair, I'm one of them. Irrespective of how many tricks I use on myself, there are just some days where I stay up late and wake up late and eventually break my routine. Are there any hacks that people can use to have a more consistent routine so it's not super erratic? Does someone want to take the question? So, I mean, it's just going to be super open, so anyone can answer it. If nobody answers, then I'll start calling out people.
I think if you keep asking these difficult questions, people will switch off their video also after some time. I'll be the first one to do that, right? But you know what? I mean, we've studied behavioral change for so long, right? And one thing I can tell you is it's very, very difficult to doctor yourself, right? I mean, in fact, the more you know behavioral sciences, the less you get influenced by it, right? Because you'll start believing, oh, this is how it works in the brain. So I now figured it out. The brain is very happy why you don't follow a disciplined routine. And that's it, end of the story, right? So I think it's very, very difficult, especially sleep. I think after, when you said you are the OG, I can also tell you most OGs are quacks. So I'm no different, right? I'm a behavioral scientist quack, right? I mean, I peddled the science for long enough now to know how to talk in a behavioral science kind of a conversation, right? But very difficult, Rhiannon, Junofy, to doctor yourself, right? And you can plan a lot of things, but unless those things are so simple and so effective that your brain starts to fall in love with it, right? I'll tell you what, I have a sleeping problem. I mean, I barely sleep like 3 hours in a day, right? And I can go like 5-6 days without any sleep whatsoever, right? And I used to get psyched about it, right? I mean, I used to read so much. Is something wrong with me? Am I kind of, therefore less productive at workplace, this, that, whatever else? And every time I read, I got more psyched, right? So there was no solution. I was just getting more and more psyched about the fact that I don't sleep, right? But then, once I came across this very, really simple thing, right, which is, so they're like complex things, you should do this and you should set up a routine and don't drink, don't smoke, don't have coffee, and don't have screen. I mean, I realized that without those things, I can't live. So I can't even preach others stop doing all of those things, right? But then I came across this really small thing that somebody said, when you want to sleep, right, just kind of take 5 breaths very simply, right? Some nonsense, right? And I tried doing that once and I slept, right? And the brain somehow learned. I don't think there's any science to it, right? I think it's all bull, right? But because it worked, the brain took it up and said, you know what, it works, right? And so now whenever I want to go to sleep, I try that little ritual. And that's the beauty of rituals, right? It's at times quite silly, but most times very effective, right? So no matter how silly it may be. And I got that ritual and somehow the brain has trained itself to say, you want to sleep, do these 10-second kind of a thing. And it works for me. Now I have to tell myself to do that also, which is a different thing, right? Which is like getting off the Netflix and telling yourselves do these 5 things, right? But very, very difficult, right? And so for 15 years in Final, I used to keep telling people, that most of the challenges in the world are behavioral in nature and people should change their behavior. But once I quit Final Mile and started something else, I realized that most of the problems in the world are design. It's got nothing to do with human behavior, right? So the best way to change your behavior is to design your environment. Because the good thing about it is you can't redesign it every now and then, right? So if you put up, very dark curtains in your house, for instance, as a solution to sleep, you won't change it every 2 days. Okay, now I should want light, I want transparent and this, that, right? So to me, the best solution is design your environment, right? When you're very, very motivated, which is once in a lifetime for me, when I'm very self-motivated to change my behavior. But take that opportunity, redesign your environment rather than kind of, patting yourself that I'm going to change the world and change myself. Nothing's going to happen, believe me. So best is go tweak your environment a little bit. It's far more stable. And that's probably the best way to change your behavior. But then, like I said, I'm a quack. So take whatever I say with a lot of salt.
No, I agree. I think just having to do this, make these choices every single day, it's just a lot of effort. So sort of redesigning your environment makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Does someone else want to add something?
I'll just jump in really quickly with, I think that what I see a lot is people do or try to establish routines just because they work for somebody else. I think that's a really big thing. Like somebody will post, don't check your email until noon. And then it's like the new thing and everybody's doing it. And I think that a lot of those routines, they're not going to work for you unless you've done the work to find out why you're doing them. So that's when, to me, like mental models come in really handy. It's like, okay, what am I trying to achieve here? What's the end goal? What is the end state? What does a success look like? And then you can kind of work backwards to see, is this going to help me? Is this going to hinder me? Is this going to be neutral? Because I know personally, I'm not a routine person. And so actually not being in a routine is a routine itself. So I always evaluate things as, okay, where am I trying to get to? And what can I do that will help me accomplish that or get to where I'm trying to go?
Thank you. Sam, you have something to add?
Yeah, well, this is very much down my alley. I could talk about this for forever. Much of my work has been on habits and routines. And beyond what you mentioned, I've also set up a company called Habit Coach Professionals that pretty much tries to provide behavioral science training for coaches. And, coaches are often trying to help people with these kind of things. And so it's kind of, I've worked on both helping people, helping coaches to do this and so on. And so it's a good question, I think, to start with. And from my perspective, which I think is something that's good to remind ourselves of, is when it comes to being a behavioral scientist, you can have whatever training and degree you can get, but in the end, what it means to be a behavioral scientist is following a behavioral science process. And you can do that to yourself as much as in your work projects. And so in this setting, tying a little bit into what Rhiannon said as well, you would start with trying to understand, what is the end goal and objective, but also, the key behavior here. You mentioned sleep as an example. And then I think the biggest problem, which is very tempting, and I think you should have on your wall, if you're working in behavioral science, don't jump quickly to solutions, understand the problem first. And I think it's very easy when we're in a field that talks about nudges, talks about exciting behavior change techniques and solutions. It's very easy to jump there first before you understand actually, why is this a problem? Why am I not able to sleep? And so on. And so if you're following the behavioral science process, you spend a lot of time trying to be curious about what are the barriers to me having regular good sleep. And once you're starting to really going deep there, I think you're going to have a really fun exploration of understanding yourself, understanding your environment, understanding how people and your environment affect you, and so on as well. And so once you do and spend enough time there, oftentimes it doesn't really, I think in that way, learning a lot of behavior change techniques can be useful, but also somewhat overrated, because if you really understand the problem, the solutions become evident after a while. And so you can kind of better solve for what actually is stage. I think when it comes to these kind of things of routines, if I would say what generally could be solutions, one thing that's very overlooked is, I would say, negative emotions. So it's very easy to forget that when we're doing things, it's often to maybe escaping some pain. It's escaping some, either that's boredom, whether that's uncertainty, whether that's overwhelm. There could be a lot of negative emotions that's leading you to maybe skip your behavior. In this case, I know a lot of people who, they have busy maybe work life, or they have kids, and the end of the day is their only time to themselves. And so they have kind of served everyone else for the whole day. And then finally, they have some time for themselves. And then they're supposed to sleep, but then, that's when they also then maybe want to, find that feeling of actually doing something for themselves. And so they want to watch some Netflix for themselves. They want to do something. And so it's kind of being a little bit curious about that and understanding how you can maybe find, getting that feeling in other ways, or exploring that in better ways. And then two, what was mentioned by Anurag, I think very overlooked is when we talk about habits, it's hard to change habits. It's much easier to set up automations that make that habit happen more as a default. So if you can set up those, blinds, if you can have some switches that turns off the lights at a certain time, if you can have a partner that comes and shames you every time you have the computer open after a certain time, if you, I don't know, if you can install certain things that kind of start to happen by itself, that's usually quite helpful. But I guess the main message here is that approach this as a behavioral scientist would, think about, the key behavior, think about the problem, think about the barriers, and then think about maybe the solution.
Right, thank you. Yeah, that was really helpful. And one thing that actually helped me was just sort of automating my lights dimming. It just
there you go.
Really
Nice.
that, hey, it's time to go to bed. That's really, really helpful. Are there some other tricks like this that people can generally use? I mean, Anurag, you already mentioned dark curtains, and that also helps with not having to wake up when the sun comes up, in case you don't want to. But
in fact, no curtains is better than dark curtains. If you don't have curtains, right? I mean, the reason why human brain wants to sleep is because it sees anything called dark, right? And it wants to wake up because it sees something called bright, irrespective whether your eyes are open or not. It's a less relevant factor, right? So if you have even if you're watching TV and you have a window which looks out into the darkness, right? Your brain would want to sleep.
Because it'll tell you it's night already, right?
Yeah. It's chemical, literally. Right?
It's harder in Scandinavia, but I agree. Generally, it's good. Here, soon it's going to be dark 24/7.
It's
Oh,
the
that's
same
true.
in Canada right now. It's bedtime for me starting 4 o'clock because it's dark. I think
Luckily,
it's
in Anurag, we are in India, so it's dark by 7, and it's perfect. So
so lucky.
It's absolutely perfect for me to go to sleep now.
yeah, Ceren, sorry, you were saying something.
How many of us actually have a nighttime routine? Sam, I see. Okay, you guys have one. That's fantastic. So I realized recently that I have a morning routine that I love and enjoy, but I don't have an evening routine. So my body and brain they're not set up to get ready for bed, to get ready for sleep. And so just even like enjoying the process of crafting what that could look like, and doing it consciously and seeing what you enjoy, what you don't, is the first step. I think most people don't have that evening routine that helps them wind down to the end of the day, something that they actually like to do.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. So sort of building something that you enjoy doing, maybe something peaceful, quiet, maybe just sitting in the bed with a book, anything, right? Yeah, makes sense. Do we have something else? Any other
Don't
ideas?
read books that make you feel sleepy.
Well, I can add something. So if we take a step back and maybe ignore for the time being the sleep example, I think, again, this is probably not a behavior change techniques really, but a more way of thinking about behavior change problems. And what we oftentimes, I think, fall into is focusing a little bit too specifically on one particular way of solving an objective. So Rhiannon again mentioned, thinking about what is the end goal, like why am I doing this? And so oftentimes we face these problems where we want to be healthier, we want to be happier, we want to be whatever we want to kind of accomplish. It's some kind of outcome, but the paths to the outcome could be many. The behaviors to that outcome could be varied. And I think it's really underrated to have a little bit of a behavior brainstorm in some ways, to a little bit explore like what could be the behavior for me. Because when I design digital products and services, oftentimes what I try to accomplish is kind of finding a person behavior match or a person habit match. So finding what is the behavior or habit that suits this person best for achieving this outcome. And it's easy to think that we're all the same, but we very much aren't. We're very different, and we all have different preferences and needs and things we enjoy. And when we establish some of these things, it's very easy to look at Instagram and think, okay, this person is doing it this way. That must be the only way to achieve this outcome. However, if you just take 5 minutes and think like, what are 10 different behaviors I could do to be healthier, or for me to have a break in my day, or whatever thing you wanted to do to feel more knowledgeable, whatever it is, you're realizing that there's a lot of paths and you have a choice there. If you want to get healthier, you don't have to run on a treadmill. There's no one that's going to force you to do that. You could do more fun things. And so I think that's a general recommendation, is to kind of be exploring more behavioral options, more behavioral paths before you kind of lock in.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, if someone doesn't really enjoy running, they might as well get their cardio doing something else they enjoy, maybe dancing, maybe playing badminton, whatever, right? So why not have fun while you're getting what you actually want, the end result, right? Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
The body doesn't care.
Great. I'm saying I've been starved of behavioral science conversation for the last 1 year since I built Mentza, right? So today it's like 15 years of archive is kind of coming through. But may I say this, motivation is a very yo-yo thing, right? In the sense that there are moments, right, when you feel highly motivated, right? Like there might be a day in a week when you're like, I must kind of solve my sleeping problem, or I must solve my eating problem, drinking problem, whatever else, right? But believe you me, that's just that moment, and then it will diminish, right? There is no way that human body can kind of keep your motivation levels very high, right? It will diminish, it will die, right? And then it will, come back one more day to trouble you, right? And my only advice is that, when you have that high level of motivation moment, right, that's not the time to act, that's the time to design, right? Because next day that motivation will fall. So for instance, I feel very motivated in the morning, one day I put my shoes on, go running, right? My idea, bad thing. When you have the highest motivation, call a friend and say, you know what, let's start running from tomorrow. That's designing your environment, right? So because the motivation will decline, so next day you're not going to get up and run, right? But unfortunately, when we're highly motivated, we change our behavior rather than designing our environment, right? You want to eat less today, don't eat less. Go buy small bowls, keep it in your house, change your design a little bit. It'll sustain for a week at least, if not for several weeks, right? But if you just act on motivation, I'm not sure if it lasts at all. Right? It will actually decline pretty soon.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's actually super insightful. Thanks, Anurag. Rhiannon, you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to add too that I think when it comes to habits, another technique, again, so I speak more in mental models than behavioral economics, but the mental model that's really useful sometimes is scale, is to just change up the way you're viewing it, right? So that a lot of people, like you see things, very classic things happen, like you set yourself this routine and then you miss it for a day. And you feel terrible and guilty, and then you lose your motivation, and then that's it, it's over, you're done. And so sometimes expanding the scale, so saying like, okay, I'm not going to try to do this every day, but I'm going to look over the next 3 months and I'm going to say, what can I do so that 3 months from now it's going to look a little bit different, and not worry about the micro of the day. Or conversely, if that's overwhelming, so another problem that people have with building routines is, oh my God, this is the rest of my life. Chances are it's not going to be, because you're going to go through different phases. You're going to change jobs. You're going to have kids. Like there's a lot of different things that happen in life. So another way to look at scale is to bring it down to the micro and just say, okay, I'm just going to worry about today. I'm not trying to build a routine for the next 50 years. I'm just trying to build something for today. And so I think that giving yourself, I think what mental models do for me is it's giving yourself the space to think about things from different perspectives and different contexts. So you don't feel locked into something, and that, if you put yourself in a position of seeing yourself as a failure or something like that. I mean, you're not, you're normal, you're human, everything's great. It's just, how can you be that little bit better? And you give yourself the space to explore that.
Right. That actually makes a lot of sense as well. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming when you are picturing yourself running every day the next whole year. But when you think of just the next couple of days, it seems a little more doable as well. And if you actually start enjoying it, then maybe you'll continue doing it as well. And of course, if you design your environment accordingly. Do we have something else, or should we?
I can add one more thing maybe, because I want to underline what Anurag said. I think that's a really, really good thing to remember. And I think that's a really great recommendation. And as an additional part to that, it's really useful to consider that we already have obviously habits in our daily lives. And so those are the moments where our less conscious self will be there. We will be doing things without really thinking about it. And so if we look at our, let's say 16 waking hours of a day, some of those hours are going to be very aware. Some of them are going to be very much on autopilot, or this kind of habit self mode. And so, a little bit to Anurag's point of like when we should really also design versus do, we should think about that and realizing that if we're going to design an evening routine, as was kind of discussed, that's probably going to be the time when we're going to be the most in autopilot. We're going to be tired. We're going to be, less energy and less cognitive capacity to really make good decisions. And so that's when we oftentimes need to have things designed in advance. So we kind of have prepared for the moments when we have the least brain capacity to do the right thing, because otherwise we will do what's the easiest, what's the most pleasurable, like just eating popcorn and watching Netflix or something. I don't know. And so it's good to be kind to our future self and know when our future self are going to be most in this kind of very autopilot state. And if we can, when we have that more aware capacity to design, to design for those moments. So there's times in the morning or in the evening when we're the most, autopilot, that to kind of design in advance, so those moments are more likely to lead to good things happening.
Right, thank you. I'm going to quickly take a question from the audience.
I have one quick comment to make
Sure,
on that
Anurag,
one,
go
right? I
on,
mean,
go on.
and I know some people are very quiet, right? Because I just can't stop talking, but so be it. But the good behaviors are not rewarding. They are rewarding, right? So a good sleep is very rewarding, right? And going out for a walk in the morning or running is very rewarding, right? The only problem is that we don't reward ourselves after those good behaviors, right? So one of the things we can build as a habit is also to reward ourselves, right? So if you slept very, very well, the next day in the night, watch a nice movie so you feel like you've rewarded yourself for having slept well, right? But if you don't build the reward, right, it looks like a pain. But any good thing rewarded suddenly doesn't look like a pain anymore, right? So just a small quick point to add.
Thank you, Anurag. Makes sense. So Partha wants to know why we spend more than what we actually need to. So it's sort of addressing the spending behavior. Does someone have some insights to share there?
I do. I have quite a few. So I've been doing a lot of research on inflationary environments and how people behave with the macroeconomic contextual changes. And there's a lot of interesting data coming from both Google as well as literature. There's a few things that we're noticing specifically right now. And that is that although people are saying that they're trying to spend less and they want to spend less, in actuality, when you look at like real behavioral data through credit card and debit card transaction volume, spend is growing. And so there is a really big action intention gap today around people trying to spend less but still spending more. And there's a few things fueling this. Coming out of the pandemic, the term like revenge spend, revenge travel was quite real in our data, and we still see that going. People are still traveling at all-time highs, still spending higher than ever. And especially like in Canada, we had several lockdowns and months of being just indoors, not being able to do what we wanted. And so coming out, we really went from like a scarcity mindset to this abundance mindset, especially after the vaccine rollout started. And so we see that behavior prolonging right now. And so there's a subconscious desire to live and experience in the now. There's heightened short-term thinking at the moment versus long-term thinking. That's also coming from like the high levels of uncertainty in the economy. So a lot more focus on today, living today, even though there's a conscious desire to spend less. So that has been an interesting one to check. The other piece is that, as we've really heard, behaviors and habits are hard to change right away. And so, there's a lot of tactics we can talk about on how to like start that process with small steps, but they don't happen overnight. So coming out of the pandemic and spending a lot and living a lot, you're not going to change your behavior overnight. It's going to take time. So we're seeing that progression as well. And then the last piece I'll talk about is beliefs around money. So we have a lot of beliefs. Some of them are limiting. Some of them are protective beliefs around money. But depending on what yours are, you will behave accordingly to those beliefs. So, for example, if spending gives you comfort and joy, and you need comfort in your life, you're going to automatically subconsciously go to retail shopping and retail therapy. And so if you have scarcity beliefs around money, you're going to try to keep that money closer to you and not spend as much. And so really identifying like what are your beliefs around money, what does money fulfill for your core needs, and are there other ways that you can get that need met? So if it's retail therapy, maybe instead try to do yoga or something else that can comfort you instead of shopping. Things like that can really help change your relationship with money.
Thanks, Ceren. That again touches upon something we discussed earlier as well about how you have to sort of try and really find the root cause of your problem. So you're spending, sure, but why, right? And figuring out an alternative and not just cutting it, trying to cut it right there. Because you do need that hit of dopamines when you have a bad day. Just an alternative might be helpful. The last point resonated, yeah.
The one other thing that I will also say is what's interesting about inflationary times is that you would assume rationally that as prices go up, people would spend less. But what ends up happening is that people end up spending more today with the assumption that prices will go up in the future. So I might as well spend now because it's just going to get more expensive. And that behavior just ends up continuing. It actually perpetuates inflation a little more. So there's a bit of a cycle there when it comes to our current macro environment and spending as well.
Right, makes sense. Yeah. And also these days it's just becoming more and more easy to spend. The apps have optimized payment processes so well. It's literally a click away. You no longer have to find your credit card, enter those numbers, nothing. It's just a click away. And I don't know about how things are where you guys are, but in India at least, I was really surprised when I came back here. It's amazing. Everybody in this, at least in most cities, have these QR codes you can just scan to send money. Because it's super easy. And it's not just shops, it includes folks selling tiny things in the street. It includes beggars. It's everybody has QR codes these days you can just scan and send money to. It's amazing. But yeah, again, back to controlling spending. How do we do it?
I can add some maybe context as well. So, as mentioned, spending can probably be more fun than saving. So I'm guessing the reason this question is asked is that he or she wants to save more. And so it's interesting to consider what makes, saving less of a interesting thing to do than spending. And it might be obvious, but what's interesting when you look at research to make savings more rewarding, one of the main things you can do is attach saving to something meaningful and something that's maybe in a medium future to long future, but it could be something like either save for a particular reason, like buying a house, doing some form of special thing, being able to invest in your space, and that is clearly a quite effective way to make savings more fun. And in fact, a really great Swedish, I was warning I was going to promote Swedish businesses today. There's a Swedish app called Dreams, which I really think are doing a wonderful job here because they've understood this, and their whole pretty much service is based on two things. So one, connecting savings to dreams. So the first thing you do is you create a dream to save towards. And that could be anything. It could be short-term, medium-term, long-term thing. And so when you save, you don't save for just putting things in your random savings account. You save for this dream. Second thing, which is perhaps also very, very, very important, we mentioned this before, but it's finding ways to make that easy and automatic. So you can set up saving hacks so that you take out a certain day of the month, it automatically takes money from your spending account to your savings account. And then my favorite parts is you can add these kind of fun saving hacks. So you can add a thief who's going to randomly come into your account and take from your spending to your savings. For example, for me, who's watched some football, you can do every time your football team scores, some money goes from your spending account to your savings account. And so I think I really love what they've done to make savings more easy and fun. And then if you want to make spending less fun, I have a credit card, but I would say credit cards are bad here because they create a distance, right? So we talked about a little bit of just having a QR code makes the pain of paying less painful. Well, if I have a credit card, it even becomes even less painful because you're not actually paying for it right now, you're paying for it at some point in the future. And so if you have credit cards, it's probably going to make it, even easier for you to spend rather than save as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And I really like the concept of saving towards something. That just makes it a lot more fun. I mean, unless you get some dopamine hit by just looking at a large bank balance, just by saving more money. But yeah, creating these savings pots can be super helpful as well. Yeah.
Quick shout out, by the way. Sorry, I was going to say, Money on the Mind blog is a fantastic place for everything like this. So Merle van der Aker has a really wonderful blog, Money on the Mind. So check that blog out if you want to have a lot of insights on this topic.
Just a couple things I was going to say too. I mean, attaching savings to something it doesn't have to be a physical thing that you're going to go buy. I mean, when I was younger, I made my savings attached to freedom, so like every time I saved, what I was really doing was buying myself the freedom to make more independent choices that weren't driven by financial desperation. So you can put that kind of attachment to it. But I was also going to say too, like, again, it goes back to diagnosing the problem. Like, why are you spending? Is it for that quick dopamine hit? Like, what is it? But there's just a lot of really good tools out there to help people navigate through this territory. There's a lot of great budget sites, and sometimes, I find with some people in my life, it's just an unawareness of how much they're actually spending because they don't take time to put it into a contacts monthly or whatever. So, your problem may not be that you love doing it. It's just that you don't even realize what you're doing. So looking at tools Samuel mentioned some, I just want to reiterate that you don't have to do everything on your own. Asking for help, even if it's like getting a tool, is a really great way to start trying to check in with what your problems are and get ideas for solving them. Because you may not have the ideas, you may not have the knowledge. I always say, if you really want advice about something, like, look at people who are already doing it really well. Like, who do you know who does save well, who does have their financial situation organized and solid, and just go ask them, like, what did you do? What was your mindset? What prompted you to make these changes? And, you collect that advice, and then the more information you get, on the ground information from people who have real experience, the more the idea of saving becomes less scary, and the more tools you have to sort of look at what's right for me.
Thanks, Rhiannon. I think that just applies to absolutely anything one wants to learn or change in their life. Just sort of outsourcing the ideation process and trying to get all this information from all these other people who have actually done it right, just really, really helps. Go on.
Sorry, go on. No, so, the question was, why do we like to spend more than what we earn or what we must, right? And I think, if you go to emotional appraisals, right, as in why do we feel the emotions we feel? Two big factors in it is novelty and power. Right? Both of them are associated with spends. You can't spend and not experience novelty. It's a given. Right? Every time you spend, there's something novel, something new in your environment, in your wearings, in your, whatever else, right? So, and novelty is a big part of emotions, right? Everything new is very, very attractive to us. Plus money is power, right? Every time you spend, you feel power, irrespective of whether that money is yours or not, right? Then, I also feel that there's a lot of problem with misspending and not just overspending, right? And misspending could be, you should have spent that money, but on something else rather than on this thing, right? For instance, that doesn't really apply to saving, right? So, we know Taylor's, experiments around when you try to buy 3 packets of juice, for instance, you will end up buying 1 packet of juice which you really don't need, or which you won't drink simply because of variety. You kind of bought, 2 oranges, 1 watermelon, and then you don't like watermelon, it will get wasted, right? So there are a bunch of things that you can do to kind of curb some of these things. But I also feel that this idea of saving is very abstract in the sense that it doesn't have specific milestones, it doesn't have specific colors, it doesn't have specificness to it, right? Spending has specificness to it. I bought a coffee, I bought a car, I bought a house, right? There's specificity, right? Savings often don't have any specific, it's like an abstract something, right? You just keep saving for what, right? And always it looks like a long-term goal, right? Our ability to see our future is limited to the next hour, literally. We can't even see ourselves at the weekend, right? in the beginning of the week, right? And imagine trying to imagine future, which is so abstract that there is saving, right, for whatever reason. So I really like the idea of creating more specificity, right? But the whole behavioral science literally started with mental accounting, right? So guys, please do mental accounting. That's one of the simplest thing to do, right? Create 5 buckets of saving, create 1 big bucket of spend, big bucket, right? But create even 5 small buckets of saving, you'll see your savings will improve. Now, if you try to create 5 big buckets of saving and 1 small bucket of spending, nothing's gonna happen. It's not gonna work for you, right? So sum of parts is always greater than the whole, right? That's not just an idiom. That's just how things are in our lives, right? So divide it, you will see the sum much bigger than the other way, right? So again, rambling.
Can I just add something there? Just for whoever asked this question, feel free to experiment with yourself, because, you know, as behavioral economists, behavioral scientists, we know the power of experimentation. Not one tactic will work for you because of an array of reasons we've talked about. I can say for myself, I have tried mental accounting, I have the apps. I asked a friend and showed me, he's like a great budgeter. He has a tricks, like a Excel sheet, sorry, that he shared with me. I tried to do it, I couldn't do it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't working. And I needed to save a lot of money for property. And ultimately, I just realized I can't go against the grain of my own behavior, my own subconscious needs. A lot of it is also what you learned about money from your parents growing up. Like, my dad was pretty laissez-faire with money. Like, I don't think he ever budgeted. So I never saw that growing up. Like, fortunately, like, you know, we had that privilege growing up, but I didn't learn those lessons. And so what I actually did to save a lot of money was I defaulted. Just purely by force. Every time I get my salary, a big chunk percentage would go into savings and I would never touch it. And I had to make do with whatever was left. And first couple months were hard. I was like, oh no, I'm going over a little bit. That forced me to change my behavior. And that's what worked for me. It may work for you, it may not. But you can try all of these things until you land on what does. Just don't stop until you find it, if it's important to you.
Thanks, Ceren. That's helpful. So I feel terrible for having scheduled this for just an hour, because we have like some 20 questions from the audience. I'm going to take one of the questions first, and then if we have time, another one. This question is particularly interesting. So someone just said, I generally get anxious when I do not have a routine and start blaming myself for not trying hard enough. Why is that? So I want to make this a little bit broader. These days, we have all these, you know, influencers, productivity influencers talking about, you know, how do you survive on 5 hours of sleep? How do you wake up at 4 in the morning, run, you know, do everything perfect, work for so long, be hyper productive, have all your flow and everything. And a lot of people just feel terrible because they're not able to do it. And we've all been there as well, right? Where we want to be something and we're not. How do we deal with that generally?
This is a great question. Do you want to start?
No, I was waiting for somebody to start, so you started very well.
Okay. I mean, I would love to ask more questions to this person to understand what it is about, like, the lack of routine that makes them anxious. But because I don't really have that opportunity, I think something that I have learned is, I'll take a step back for a second. So almost 95 to 97% of our like inner behaviors, thoughts are subconscious, right, in our actions. So we know that as behavioral scientists. What we know as well is that our conscious cannot override our subconscious. Like, that is the action intention gap that we see often. And what we haven't talked about today is our core needs as people. So there's the 6 basic needs that some of you may be familiar with. There's like secondary and tertiary needs that are a little bit more conscious. And those 6 basic needs, one of them is to have stability and control. And so we can get that in many different ways in our lives. But if you're having a perceived lack in that area, then you're going to try to find it through other means. Some people control their routine, some people control their eating, some people control others, so these can show up in different ways in life. So part of it is figuring out like, what are your needs and why do you have them? Because if you don't know them, then you don't know how to solve them. So I can give you an example of myself. I wanted to lose weight, and I was doing everything to lose weight. But what I didn't realize that I had an associated behavior to eating sweet food with feeling like relaxed and comforted. And because that need was so strong, I kept going back to eating like sweets. And so really what I needed to do was not focus on like eating healthy and focus on like working out, but actually was, how do I get that need met in other ways so I'm not craving those sweets? And in fact, I'm actually fulfilling that need. Another interesting one is people who binge watch TV or like reality TV. I'm guilty of that myself. That actually can relate back to needing the core need of love and connection. If you're feeling lonely, you might be watching a lot of TV to feel, connected to the characters. And so that's why you're behaving that way. How else can you use that time to maybe make a new friend or call up somebody and get that need met? So I would encourage you to think about, what is it about feeling anxious about not having that routine that is like not fulfilling a need. Maybe it's a need for control in your life or something else. The other needs, by the way, are the need for significance. Significance can show up, with like needing money or a status, for example, in the workplace. The need for growth. So a lot of us are very interested in personal development. So I'm sure we all have a very high need for growth. Contribution, giving back as well. And also, as much as we need certainty in our lives, we also need novelty. So having that novelty. So these are all just some core parameters to think about. And then there's also tertiary and secondary and tertiary needs. If you are interested in this, Thais Gibson talks about this a lot. I learned a lot from her coaching, and it truly changed the game for me in controlling my own and managing my own behaviors, because now I'm working with my subconscious and not against my subconscious.
Thank you, Ceren. Anurag, you wanted to say something.
Just one quick comment, right? I mean, the problem with routines is that we design it for failure, right? Most often, right? My simple hack is hack the results before the inputs, right? So design it in such a way that you always win, right? At least in the beginning, right? And I'll connect it back to what you were saying, right? I mean, where does control come from? Right? Control comes from optimism, right? Without optimism, there is no control. And where will optimism come from? When you get good results out of your work, right? So this whole idea of small commitments, small goals, I'm okay with it, right? But my personal point of view is, right, that hack the results first, right? You cannot be unsuccessful in your first attempt. And the only way you cannot be unsuccessful in your first attempt is when a very small result is very, very desirable, right? And that's how optimism builds. And once you have optimism, right, there's so much control, right? I mean, we have seen research on wealth management, right? I mean, they did this, ING guys did a brilliant research on wealth management, right? And one of their core finding was that, financial acumen is not a determinant of financial discipline as much as optimism is, right? So if you are more optimistic about your financial outcomes, you will show far more discipline than what you will get from acumen, right? So I might be the most learned person on finance and everything else, right? And my mom may not be, or my mom's mom may not be, but if they were more optimistic, they did better than me, right? So all I'm saying is that, design results for optimism, not for failure, right? So even a small result should seem like a big result, right? And that just depends on how you kind of set yourself up. I mean, look at all these, Instagram videos of people kind of working out, right? I mean, seriously, I mean, that kind of workout won't happen after 5 years of my trying, right? So I rather kind of, just lift the weight once and keep it down and feel very happy about it, right? And then kind of go from there if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I was spotlighted here. So yeah, I agree. I think that's great. And I would say maybe as an additional thing to consider, maybe taking a little bit different perspective here, is this idea of, I think part of the human experience, unfortunately, has to do with feeling things like anxiety, overwhelm, a lot of negative states. And I think there's kind of two general things I would say here. Is one, obviously, the best superpower you can have for self-development, self-growth is to have self-kindness. So oftentimes, if you can find ways to have that inner conversation with yourself to be a positive one and kind one, that's going to create oftentimes a lot of positive feedback loops and positive kind of ripple effects. So if you can find ways to be kind toward yourself, and again, we often have thoughts and voices in our head that might not always belong to us. It might belong to a parent or something like this that we kind of carry with us. So it's okay to question some of your thoughts and kind of replace them with kinder ones. Beyond that, I think it's also interesting to consider that whatever situation you kind of orchestrate, whatever thing you do in the environment to make things easier and better, you will find times where you feel variations of call it pain and suffering, right? And it's really interesting from a behavioral science or behavioral change standpoint. There's a lot of research when you look at things like people with addiction that wants to, let's say they want to quit smoking. What is one of the more maybe novel and promising ways? Well, it's to just become aware of this, so build awareness, and then build a way to surf the urge in this case. So it comes from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, where the goal for these people would be to just notice that they have an urge for something, they have an anxiety, they have some form of negative emotion that feels bad. And their impulse in the smokers is to smoke, but it might be something else for you. It might be, we're talking about various reasons for shopping and spending. It might come from a similar place. And we oftentimes don't really spend as much time on this as like, what is the negative emotion? What is the negative feeling? And one of the things you're trained to do in ACT is to surf the wave. So just noticing that there's going to be a wave. You're going to feel high degree of, let's say, in this case, craving, but then it's going to dissipate and it's going to disappear. And that can be a very powerful thing too, just to kind of like notice and be curious about some of these things we're feeling. That we're going to feel anxious sometimes, so we're going to feel some of these feelings, and our first impulse is to run away from them, to find ways to escape them. But to surf them can also be very valuable. So yeah, there's a lot of literature on ACT and some of these things, but yeah, being curious and kind, I think, is a good rule of thumb.
Thanks, Samuel. I'm going to direct the next question to Anurag. What's something that you fixed in your life successfully using behavioral science? Just some story.
Couple of things, right? So one is, when I first learned about want and like, I really implemented in my life, right? Saying everything you want doesn't mean you like, right? And the moment you start thinking of that framework, you'll see there's so many things that you want, but you don't like doing, right? And they are just so easy to eliminate once you start bracketing them. So you only do what you want and like both. And sometimes that can be wrong as well, right? Like binge watching can be want and like both. I'm okay with that sitting in that box, right? But most often want and like are not so bad, right? What is worse is what you want but don't like, right? And if you can eliminate that first, it's been easy for me, right? Just kind of thinking want and like as a method, right? The second one is, you're talking about mental models, and personally, I think mental models can be very, very personal. They don't need to be public in that sense that it's applicable to a lot of people, right? And at some point, I found a mental model that, the less I eat, the more energetic I feel, right? And I don't know where it happened, right? It could have happened in a jiffy somewhere, right? And I just kept reiterating that to myself, right? And now I've developed that belief, right, that if I eat more, I'll be less energetic, right? And it's such a personal mental model. It's got nothing to do probably with science and everything else. You tell my daughter the same thing, probably doesn't even apply to her, right? But for me, since I reiterated to myself a couple of times, practice it, it just become my personal mental belief. And so, as much as we might like those, human mental models, I think we can build our own mental models pretty easily, and we can get very, very committed to it.
Thank you, Anurag. Another question to Rhiannon, sort of the same question. What's something that you fixed in your life successfully using mental models, given you're sort of an expert in that area?
Sure. I just want to make a really quick point on the earlier question about anxiety. I find that to believe and have anxiety is a negative feeling, but it also means that you must think that there's a positive counterpoint, that people exist without feeling anxiety on that situation. And I mean, this is a bit out of left field. It's just something that works for me is I read a lot of history. And when you get that kind of context to see all the different ways people have been successful and all the different ways they've navigated through life and all the struggles that they've gone through and still managed to sort things out, it makes you feel, well, it makes me feel a lot better about the challenges I'm facing. But into your particular question about using behavioral science to solve problems, I solve 100% of my parenting problems with mental models. Absolutely 100%. I find I have 2 kids, 2 sons, and they're different. So that's great. So I get to practice different techniques on each one. The other amazing thing about kids is they give you instant and honest feedback. And there's not a lot of places in life where you get instant and honest feedback from a place of love, right? Your kids love you. They want things to work out. You want things to work out. So you get this feedback and then you can iterate and you can try again. So that's where I've had my greatest success with mental models. Sometimes I find using mental models on a problem that's just for me, like, what to do next in my career or something like that, that can get a little bit introverted because I'm the only person thinking about it. Whereas I find I get the best use out of mental models when they kind of hit the road. And when I use them with people, with friends, and like I said, with my kids, there have been so many situations where I'm like, okay, parenting problem, and let's go. And I have my list and I have my top 10 and I start with those. And then if they're not working, I keep going until I find something that it just doesn't necessarily solve the problem right away, but just gives me a little bit of space, a little bit of insight into something new to try. And the other thing I do is I'm really honest with my kids about that's what I'm doing. I'm like, Mom is using mental models right now. Mom is actually using this mental model, and this is what it means, and this is how I'm using it, and these are the conclusions I'm drawing, and this is what I'm going to try. And now it's been so many years, they're on board with it, and they kind of sometimes use them on me. But I think that's a really important thing that we haven't really had time to talk about today too much is feedback. Right? Like feedback is so important. Like whatever you're trying, whatever technique, whatever you're exploring, you have to look for the feedback, be open to receiving it if it comes from a place of genuine caring, or if it comes from the world, which is just, that's the world giving you feedback. I mean, you may not like it, but you certainly have to consider it. And that it's the feedback that lets you iterate, that lets you try something new, and make progress towards your goals. So
thank you for sharing that. Any last comments? We're going to wrap up in a minute or two, so if anyone else wants to add anything, absolutely anything that you want to share.
I love that last point that you said about feedback. I think another piece is feedback to ourselves and to assess ourselves in a very kind way, like to Samuel's point too. How do we talk to ourselves? I think if I could leave like one piece of advice is to check your self-talk, because that is your reality. Your thoughts and your subconscious beliefs are your reality, how you see the world, the lens with which you see the world. Some things that I've done to really notice that is, let's say I'm being really hard on myself for something, actually say that's not my own voice, that critical voice. I give it a name and I'm like, thank you, but I don't need that right now. And I think about, what I would say to myself, like I would say to a loved one, And so a couple of examples of that when you're trying to change any behavior is, instead of saying, I can't do that, or I can't eat this piece of cake, or I can't spend, or I can't meet my routine, like it's very, sort of harsh, you can choose to say, actually, I don't eat that cake today. I don't want to, because that's your identity. You've chosen to do that. It's in your control. It's not something that you are told that you can't or you shouldn't. The other piece is whenever you have a challenge ahead of you, or something like difficult happens in your life, we tend to ask the question, why is this happening to me? And whether we kind of consciously do it or not, why is this happening? Trying to find grasping answers for like this negative thing. But I often ask myself, why is this happening for me? And all of a sudden I see all the reasons why this challenging moment is actually helping me learn something, overcome something. Usually in hindsight, it ends up being the best thing that happens. So just a little tip on language and self-talk.
Thank you, Ceren. Just want to thank all the panelists for joining us today. It was a really fun conversation, right? It just went, it just flew around. It was really fun. And I'd also like to thank the IBEN team. They've been a great support throughout making this happen. And a huge thanks to my mom, who constantly sneaked in warm water for me so I can manage to keep talking throughout. And yeah, right, we have one more event next Thursday in Delhi. So if anyone is based out of Delhi, please do join us. It's going to be an in-person event after a really, really long time. So it'll be really nice to see everyone in person in Delhi. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.